Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. So in today's video we're going to be playing with this gorgeous Meadow of Sweet Peas layering stencil and embossing folder from Lisa Horton Crafts. Now if you haven't seen her embossing folders before, they're absolutely stunning and this one is no exception. And so I really wanted to see if I'd be able to use the layering stencils without having her Ultimate 2 tool, which is what these stencils are designed to be used with. They've got special features on them to help you be able to line them up using that tool. And so I really wanted to use the stencils with this embossing folder, so I did purchase them and I thought, well, let's give it a go. Let's see if we can actually use these without having a special tool. And actually it's really easy to line them up. So all the stencils are numbered and there's actually 10 stencils in this set, which seemed like a lot, but actually they're so easy to use and the result is so stunning that it really wasn't a hardship to keep having to line up the next layered stencil. And I think when I looked at the camera footage before I sped it up, it took me about 10 minutes to do all the layered stencils in real time. So yeah, definitely worth it. And for someone that doesn't have a lot of patience for a lot of colouring, when I think about how long it would take me to colour a floral stamped image, for example, it could be looking up to an hour if I really want to put a lot of effort into it. Whereas this gives you really beautiful results really quickly. So you can make some stunning cards actually really fast. Now I'm just kind of lining up the stencils over the embossing folder just to make sure what's going to be the flowers, what's going to be the leaves, where it didn't seem too obvious to me at first. And so I just want to get a feel for them before I go ahead and start adding ink through them, because obviously I don't want to end up with pink leaves and green flowers. So first of all, I've got a piece of cardstock. Now I've cut this to 6 inches by about 7. I wanted it to be slightly longer because I thought I was going to use the attachment feature of the stencil as a guide, but I ended up changing my mind on that. So I didn't really need the card to be that long. I've got my waffle flower grip mat, and what I'm doing is I'm just lining up the bottom left hand corner with the stencil so that you've got the straight edges of the stencil on the cardstock edge, and then that feature that would attach to the Ultimate tool is holding onto my grip mat. Now another way that you could do this if you don't have a grip mat is to use that attachment feature as your guide. So you could ink blend through the dots, and then for every stencil you'd make sure those ink blended dots lined up on the cardstock. So that's another way of doing it, but because I've got my grip mat I really wanted to use that because I know that it holds my stencil in place really well. So I'm going to be using the Gina K Designs ink cubes that I've got, and I've started off with light carnation. So I've got 3 of the trios here. I've got the spruce trio, the carnation trio and the orchid trio, and each of these blends has got a light, medium and a dark, so that you know they go really well together. I do end up mixing the orchids with the carnation and they actually look really pretty together. So I've just gone over that other stencil with the medium carnation. I'm now coming in with some light orchid, which is a lovely soft pinky purple colour, and then I'm going to go over the next stencil with medium orchid. So we're going from light to dark. Now of course you don't need to use lots of different coloured inks here. If you've only got one shade of pink, then you can just vary the amount of pressure for each stencil so that you get shading even within just that one colour. So for the stems I've used medium spruce, and then for the leaves I'm coming in with light spruce. And I'm using a heavier hand here because I want these leaves to be darker, because I know on the next stencil I'm going to use lighter pressure so that I can still use the same shade of spruce but get that variated colour. So that's just a great tip, especially if you don't have a lot of inks in your collection. You actually can do a lot of shading techniques with just one colour just by varying that pressure. And you could definitely use different mediums for this. You could use your embossing powders, you could use texture paste and stencil butters just to add some dimension and a different feel to the card. And of course you can really mix this up by changing the colours that you use, the cardstock that you ink blend on. There's lots of different ways to change this up, but because it's my first time using this layering stencil and it's got so many layers, I wanted to keep it nice and simple. I didn't want to overwhelm myself with trying too many new things in one go. So I've peeled off that card now from my grip mat, And look at that, it's so pretty, even without the embossing folder. So you could just use the stencils on their own. But today I am going to go ahead and emboss it with the embossing folder. So I'm just trimming the panel down just so that it's 6 inches square and so that it's going to fit nicely in the embossing folder. In order to get it lined up nicely, you want to make sure that it is about that size, and then it's a lot easier just to pop it in the folder and line it up. So I've just popped that straight in the embossing folder, and now I'm going to go ahead and run that through my big shot machine. And it's embossed beautifully. I don't know how well you can see it on camera, but that added little bit of dimension has really kind of popped the colouring off the page, and it's just added that extra something to just really make this stand out. So now let's go ahead and turn it into a card. And I'm going to keep it relatively simple because we've done all that hard work with the stenciling. We don't want to go ahead and cover it up. So I'm just trimming it down again, just so that it measures 5.5 inches square. I'm going to be making a 6x6 card today. So by trimming it down to 5.5 inches squared, it means that I'm going to have a nice border in order to be able to add a matte layer of card, which I'm going to add in pink. So that's going to measure 5 5/8 squared. And because it's a shop bought card, it is slightly smaller than 6x6. So these kind of mats and layers work best for that size. So it's probably more like 5 7/8 squared really. For a sentiment, I've got this Concord 9th die set that's the Mortisay dies, and this one says thanks so much. So I've die cut the shadow layer from some vellum, and then the thanks so much is from the same pink cardstock that we're matting our card onto. Depending on the coloured inks that you've used, if you haven't got coloured cardstock that would match, then you could definitely use your ink pads just to ink up a matte layer just around the edge and ink up some cardstock to die cut from. So that's another way of making sure that it's nice and cohesive. And then I'm just using some liquid glue to stick it to vellum, and it will take a few minutes to grab with the liquid glue, so I did use my magnets just to hold it down for a few minutes until it had dried. You could of course die cut the sentiment using double-sided adhesive sheets on the back, and then you wouldn't have to worry about liquid glue, but I always find that if I use double-sided adhesive sheets, it's really hard to line it up on the shadow layer, so I just find it easier to use liquid glue. Now I'm going to add some dimension to the sentiment, and I do end up using foam tape, which is really fiddly because I'm trimming down all the little bits so that it's not going to be visible through the vellum. But the best way to do this, if I'd have thought about doing it first, that's what I would have done, because I have done it in other videos, is to die cut the sentiment for a few times from cardstock, glue them together, glue them to the back of the vellum, and then that way you've got the dimension and you've got nothing showing through the vellum. But I forgot to do that today, and I've ended up using loads of tiny bits of foam tape, which has worked absolutely fine, and I don't mind cutting up foam tape like that, but I know some people just don't have the patience for that, and of course you don't need to do that. You could definitely add dimension. You could even use some fun frame, die cut the sentiment that way, and then just attach that to the back. I've got a wink of Stella pen, and I'm just using that to add a little bit of shine to some of the flowers and some of the stems and leaves, just to add a little bit of extra something to the card. I'm going to add a few little iridescent clear drops as well, and then that will be the card finished for today. So thank you so much for joining me. I really hope that you've enjoyed seeing this card come together. I hope that you've enjoyed seeing how these layering stencils work, how easy they are to use, and that you don't need any special tool in order to line them up. As always, all the products that I've used will be linked in the description box below, and I'll leave a few close-up photos for you now. Please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you'd like to see more from me, then I'd really appreciate you subscribing to my channel, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.